Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm Robbie Rhino, and in today's video I am going to be taking you through the T-72B, which is the bottom Era 3 level Soviet heavy tank for the Eastern Alliance in the Cold War game mode. And by bottom, it doesn't mean that it is powerless. It's definitely very powerful, and I'll be showing you in today's review how powerful this tank can be, even though it is the first Soviet heavy tank in Era 3 of the Cold War game mode. And I'd just like to say first off, apologies for the delay between my previous video and today's video. I've been a little bit unwell. I had to take some time off to recover, but I'm feeling a lot better and normal service will resume as from now. As this video goes live on Tuesday the 10th of May, the brand new Leopard VT2 Escalation Era medium tank, I believe, will be released, and I'll be doing a review of that shortly, and I'll be putting out plenty of World War II content as well for those of you that are interested in that. So in today's video I'll be going over all of the statistics of the T-72B, the Era 3 Soviet heavy tank for the Eastern Alliance. In the three gameplays that I'm going to be showing you, I do have the stock turret. It was just a silver issue at the time and I played through this tank with the stock turret, but I will be going through these statistics as if you were fully upgraded, so do bear that in mind. And for the first replay I'm going to be using the stock turret, and also I believe it's the second gun package that doesn't have the ATGMs, just in case the numbers confuse you or the ammunition confuses you. That's the reason why. So let's get stuck straight into talking about the T-72B. Well, being in the bottom rung of heavy tanks in Era 3, it only has 3,450 hit points, but that can still go a fair way if you manage to use its pretty decent armour and mobility to avoid fire. In terms of its view range, it's kind of neither here nor there. It's very low really at 465 meters for Cold War, but it kind of doesn't matter with the True Vision system. As you are a heavy tanker, you're going to be brawling, you're going to be using your mobility to get into positions to brawl flank opponents, and yeah, play it that way, and you're not going to be trying to spot for your team, although it still can do that. With its fantastic mobility you can get into some pretty cool locations, and that brings us nicely to talk about the mobility of the T-72B. So for a heavy tank, it's got a massive 1,130 horsepower engine with a 25.35 power to weight ratio, which is insane for a heavy tank, and pretty much everything in Era 3 is extremely quick, and this is definitely not an exception, and you will be able to get around the battlefield very quickly in this tank. You can go 67 kilometers an hour forwards, 23 kilometers an hour backwards, and your traverse speeds are really nice at 40 degrees a second on the hull and 34 degrees a second on the turret, meaning that you're able to angle up and try and bait people to shoot your tracks and bounce off your pretty troll armor. But first, before we talk about the armour, let's get stuck into talking about the gun. You have a 125mm gun with 550 alpha damage on its standard and premium APF SDS rounds, and you also have the option to carry a gun that has ATGMs, and that's the option that I choose as a preference when I'm playing this tank now. And those ATGMs have a whopping 1200 alpha damage with 750 penetration, and the alpha damage is insane and the penetration is insane. I was just looking at the numbers thinking I got it wrong, but no, I definitely haven't. Those are the numbers, and it's got fantastic penetration at that 750 millimeters and fantastic alpha damage with 1,200. If you load up an ATGM at the start of the battle, rock up to a location, slap someone with an ATGM, and then you'll be loaded with your 125mm gun very shortly after, and you've already chunked a massive part of your opponent's health off at the start of the battle. You do also have an option to fire with the single fire gun. If you choose to do that, you will have heat as your third ammunition choice, and that's the gun I'm using in the gameplay in the background right at the moment. So with this gun, the shell velocities are absolutely fantastic on the APF SDS rounds. On your standard, it's 1715 meters a second. On your premium APF SDS rounds, it's 1700 meters a second. The only downside is your ATGMs are very slow at 350 meters a second, so you do have to use them up close and personal, but that's definitely no problem for this beast of a heavy tank. So with this 125mm gun fully upgraded, you have 7.32 rounds a minute, which equates to a DPM of 4026. Tanks like the M1 Abrams and the Chieftain are slightly better, but it's definitely no slouch. You have a base reload of 8.2 seconds. Great gun handling with 2.1 second aim time and 0.3 accuracy, and if you have a good commander, choose some equipment, and yeah, you can get those numbers down to some pretty decent levels, as we'll see later on. Unfortunately, you only have 6 degrees of gun depression, so you want to try and avoid fighting on ridgelines too much and find sort of smaller ridgelines to hide this lower profile tank. But you do have 14 degrees of gun elevation, which is kind of workable in most situations, and you carry 45 rounds of ammunition. So that brings us to the end of that first gameplay there, where we finish with 3 kills, 7.4k direct damage, 1700 assistance. We finish MVP with a profit of 132,000 silver. So we're going to hop on now into the second gameplay. I'll talk you through the armor and my commander and equipment setup. So we're now on Mannheim, which is the perfect environment for the T-72B, and in this replay I am using the gun that has ATGMs as an ammunition choice, and as you can see, you can carry a maximum of 6 ATGMs, meaning you have about 39 rounds of ammunition to choose for your other ammunition in this tank. So you can choose between your standard and premium APF SDS rounds if you carry the maximum quota of 6 ATGMs. So now we're going to talk about the armor, and then we'll talk about my equipment and commander setup. So the armor on this tank is very troll, but it's definitely not something that you can always rely on. When you come up against these things, sometimes you bounce off of plates that you feel like you should penetrate, especially with tanks that have high penetration rounds. The reason for that is this is littered with explosive reactive armor. If you can see the brickwork on the sides and on the turret, that is the explosive reactive armor, which just reduces the amount of ATGM damage that enemies will do to you, and it also absorbs heat and HE ammunition depending on the thickness. And you can also struggle to penetrate with sort of mediocre to low penetration APF SDS rounds. So that's the reason why it can appear troll. It's very low profile tank with a quite small turret, a small cupola as a weak point, a relatively smaller plate. It's very fast, and you can bait people into shooting your tracks, and that's the reason why sometimes this pulls off miracle bounces. And then when you're stationary balling up close, those weak points become a lot easier to hit for your enemies, and they're able to pinpoint the weak points, which I'll talk about in just a second. So in terms of the gun mantlet, which is the strongest point of the armor, is 540mm. That's to the left, right, up and down of the gun, so don't shoot there. That is the strongest base level of armor on the T-72B, and of course that does depend on how you're angling the tank. If you're looking up at this tank, that's going to be even stronger, so definitely don't shoot the mantlet. The turret cheeks at the base level are 100mm thick, but they do have a 410mm armoured plate over the top of that, and add on 15mm explosive reactive armour as well, and it can be a very strong turret if you're looking up at it or it's at an extreme angle. You want to be very careful at shooting the turret. The turret roof above the gun is 225mm of base level armor plus 60mm of explosive reactive armor, and that basically means that if you're above this tank or you're in a tank that is taller than the T-72B, shooting the turret roof is a good option, especially if you have a high caliber gun. You should be able to penetrate through that no problem. In terms of the weak points on the turret, then the cupola is 100mm, so it's very weak, and it's a relatively small size, and due to the fast mobility that this tank has, then it can be hard to hit on the move. But if you're up close and personal, shooting the cupola is the best choice, and if you can't shoot that, maybe something's face hugging you, you want to shoot the turret ring of this tank, which is 410mm of armor, and yeah, that should be easy to go through with even the sort of lowest penetration rounds in Era 3, especially if you're playing a heavy tank or a medium tank. In terms of the upper plate and the hull, the upper plate is 170mm of armor plus 60mm of ERA armour over the top of that, and the lower plate is 150mm plus 20mm of ERA over that. At the bottom of the lower plate there is a small bar of 20mm base level armour with no explosive reactive armour over the top of that. So if you're trying to shoot the lower plate, go for the lowest portion in the middle and you should be able to penetrate through there, even if it's at an extreme angle. In terms of the upper plate, if you're looking up at it, as it is sloped backwards at quite a steep angle and it has that explosive reactive armour, it will bounce shells if you're below it, and especially if it's moving at an extreme angle at distance. But if you're up close and personal, or if you're shooting down on the upper plate, you should be able to go through it, especially with heavy tanks and medium tanks that are sort of mid to top tier in Era 3. So that's the best sort of weak points for you on the whole. In terms of the side armour, it's 80mm at the front and 70mm at the side, and it's kind of split in two. So this rear armour on the side is the weakest, and also it's got 15mm and 20mm patches of explosive reactive armour over the sides. So if you're shooting ATGMs at the T-72B from the side, you want to aim for the rear of the T-72B where the brickwork or that explosive reactive armour runs up, and you can see it on the armour model as I turn in this tank. You want to shoot towards the rear of the tank at the side and you should be able to penetrate that no problem. But yeah, the biggest weak points are the cupola, the turret ring. The rear of the tank is especially susceptible to ATGM armour because there's no ERA armour over the rear of the tank, and you also want to try and shoot the lower plate if you're looking at it from below, and also if you're looking at it from above, shoot down on top of the upper plate and you should be able to penetrate that with ease. The rear engine deck is uncovered with ERA armour, so if you're above it on a bridge like on here on Mannheim and you're shooting down on the T-72B, if you aim for the rear of the tank on the engine deck, you should be able to go through no problem with even the lowest penetration rounds in Era 3. So that's a little bit of talk about the armour on the T-72B, and now we can talk about my equipment and commander setup as this game finishes in the background. So in terms of my equipment, I run gun, stabilizer, advanced loader and traction system, and on my commander I run sixth sense, horn leader, rapid loading, steady aim, rapid aim, snapshot, run and gun, armour angling and track mechanic. In terms of the equipment, I want to improve my DPM and gun handling and the traction system, because although this is a very mobile tank at a base level, I want to improve that even more, get up to a very high top speed, and I want to be able to smush those light tanks and those lightly armoured mediums and go and ram them for some extra damage. And in terms of my commander track mechanic, that's obvious. I want to get my tracks on quicker because I'm going to be brawling in this tank. Armour angling to reduce the amount of damage that I take, because I am going to be taking damage when I am in sort of brawling situations. You can't bounce every shot unless you're incredibly lucky. And some gun handling perks and also rapid loading to improve my DPM. So if you choose to have the same setup that I have in these gameplays, you'll now have a view range of 484 meters. You can go forwards at 73.7 kilometers an hour, backwards at 25.3 kilometers an hour, and your hull and turret traverses are fantastic. So your hull is 44 degrees a second and your turret will be 39.01 degrees a second. You'll also have a DPM of 5,181. While that's not the best at Era 3, it's definitely very, very nice, and you can improve that by ramming the lightly armoured tanks and improving your DPM even more. In terms of the gun handling, if you use my commander and equipment setup, you'll have a gun aim time of 2.01 seconds, an accuracy of 0.2, which is absolutely fantastic, and a base reload for that alpha damage of 550 of 6.37 seconds, meaning this is a very, very powerful tank. That's it for the statistics of the T-72B, and we're just coming to the end of this gameplay here on Mannheim. As you can see, there are some real players fighting against a last bot there by the looks of it, and we have had a fantastic game in the T-72B. I'm just going to skip forward to the end and we'll see how we got on. So as you can see from the time in the top, it took absolutely ages for the bot and the real player to take out the final bot on the enemy team, but they managed to take this one down, so we get a victory. And although we died very early on, we finished with MVP with the mastery badge and 12k direct damage, 171 assistance, 1782 base experience points, and we got 3 kills, making 280,000 profits. We're going to head on now into the third and final game. So we're now on Chow Bang and we're into the third and final gameplay of today's video, and I can talk you through how I like to play the T-72B and how good I think this tank is. Well, in terms of the last question, how good is it? It's still a very powerful tank, although it does have the lower hit points, the lower DPM. It is, of course, the bottom Soviet heavy tank in Era 3. It's still capable of some very good damage numbers, as you saw in the first two gameplays, and people are putting out some insane damage numbers in this tank, getting close to sort of 20,000 direct damage. Yeah, if you can do that in the T-72B, imagine what you can do in the T-72BU. The top players absolutely shred in this tank, and it's definitely very effective, and it's definitely a tank that is very well suited to a new player. These Soviet tanks in the Eastern Alliance sort of territory are very forgiving tanks. They're very mobile tanks, and they do have decent guns, decent penetration, decent ammunition selection, and they're a very good line to go up. And you don't get taken out of the game too early. You do get those miracle bounces. You are able to ram things, play quite aggressively, and yeah, just learn how to play the game basically whilst not getting taken out too early. So I definitely recommend going up this line. Perhaps first, if you're a Cold War fan and you're a new player and you want a line that's going to allow you to get up to a Type 59D, someone who's bought that yeah, expensive premium tank like me, deal an ATGM at the start of the battle, and then follow up with a 125mm round and get a kill, and you're already up to 2.4k direct damage, as you can see in the gameplay in the background. And that is a tactic that I like to play with in the T-72B. So the ATGMs, I like to start off with one, get into a location, try and ambush someone at the start of the game, and then I start to fire with my 125mm gun. When I'm going to be traversing across an open part of the map or a long part of the map, and I want to get to a place that's going to take me a good sort of 15 to 20 seconds, I'll maybe load up an ATGM, so when I get to that location I'm able to deal that whopping 1200 alpha damage with that fantastic penetration. And as you can see, I'm playing very aggressively in this gameplay. This was probably one of the first games that I played with the ATGM gun, and I'm just playing aggressive. I'm seeing what the armor can do, I'm seeing how sort of far I can push this tank's armor, how much damage I can do, how aggressive you can be. And I found that if you're aggressive sort of in this tank, and especially in Cold War, you get that sort of meta where people will follow you. If you push, they'll push with you, and if you swarm tanks in Cold War, usually you absolutely decimate them with the high rates of fire that is in Cold War. And this tank's a fantastic leader. You just rush forward, maybe bounce a shell, put an ATGM into someone, just shred them, damage them, you ram them, and it's just an absolute powerhouse, and it is very much fun to play. And you do make a lot of silver even if you don't use silver boosters, and it's definitely, you know, it's not a premium tank, but you'll still make a lot of silver, you'll have a lot of fun. You have that option to fire ATGMs. Because of the low shell velocity with the ATGMs, you can practice leading your ATGMs with low shell velocity, like the BMP 2 and 3 has low shell velocity for a light tank, so that's a good way to practice firing your ATGMs. And it's a platform that allows you to be very effective, it's very forgiving, and you can rack up some very nice damage numbers. And also, if you're into the aesthetics of the tanks, you have 4 different skins that you can purchase for the T-72B, each costing you, I believe, 2,000 gold if you so wish. And yeah, they're not too bad for skins, they look okay, and I definitely recommend having a look at them if you're interested in styling up your T-72B. But overall, it's a very good package. The armor doesn't work as good as you may think. I thought this would be nearly invincible to some tanks, and it would bounce a lot more than it it felt like it did when I played against them. That's not the case, however, it does bounce miracle shots that will keep you alive at the end of the battle when you really should have died because you've made a bad play. And if you play this thing aggressively, you're fast moving, constantly moving, always angling. If people are aiming at you, want to wiggle, go left and right, try and bait them to shoot your angled upper hull, or the ERA armor or the spaced armor, or try and absorb shots into your tracks. And yeah, it's just a very forgiving tank, a very sort of new player, user-friendly tank, and yeah, you can't really go wrong with it. It's a lot of fun. The DPM, although it isn't the best compared to like a Chieftain or an M1 Abrams, it's still very good. You can't really play that whole down gameplay like you would in a Chieftain or something like an M1 Abrams. However, yeah, the 6.2 years of depression you can make work on most ridge lines, especially on terrain like this. You just pop over, put a shell, and you use the fantastic mobility to get out of harm's way, and you just chunk your opponents down whilst you're trying to bounce their shells. And as you can see here, the reverse speed is very nice. If you use the traction system, you can bait people up hills, try and get them to come up, and then put shells into them. And it's just a fantastic brawler. And if this is the start of the Soviet tanks in Era 3, I think I'm going to have a lot of fun when I finally go for the T-72B right at the top. So in this game, in the background, you can see that we've picked up 10k direct damage, 1513 assistance, and we've blocked 1410. We've just been like a wrecking ball going forward, pushing the team forwards with us, and it looks like we're going to be able to take this one down with a victory. I managed to drive into a rock here, but we do get that shot around the rock into the side of the T-72BM, which is the next tank up from this tank, and I'll look forward to playing that when I finally get enough silver. In terms of the consumables, I should just mention quickly, I run large repair kit, large med kit, and as you can see, I run the whole patch kit to get some HP back. Maybe that allow me to take one more shot in those close games. If I'm not able to bounce, then I'm able to take a shot and go forward and use my tank to take the game down for my team. And I found that it's very effective when you're in Era 3 and you're a heavy tank and you do have a relatively substantial amount of hit points. So that's it for the final replay there on Chow Bang. We finish MVP once more with 8 kills, just shy of 12k direct damage, 1500 assistance, 1994 base experience points, and we make 262,000 silver. So I hope you enjoyed my review of the T-72B and you saw how powerful this tank can be. So make sure to keep an eye out in the coming days for the review of the Leopard VT2. That looks like a very powerful tank with great DPM. But until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.